Hello, everybody. Welcome to our program. This is English Digest. And today is our literature unit, as it's going to be tomorrow and the next day. And so we're going to be talking about a featured work of literature as we do every month. Today's featured work of literature is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Maybe you've heard of this story. It's an old story, but well, I guess it's kind of popular in English-speaking countries. I haven't read it myself. I don't think you've read it either, Stephanie. But the term Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is very commonly used to describe someone who is kind of two-faced, okay?
Or sometimes you'll just hear, oh, he's a Jekyll and Hyde, or she's a Jekyll and Hyde. There was a very popular musical on Broadway about this whole story, and it's been made into movies too. I have not read the actual novel, I must confess, but I have seen several movies that have this sort of theme in it. And like I said, there was a Broadway musical that produced some really gorgeous music, so you might want to check that out. We're actually going to talk about the real novel, though, that was written by Robert Louis Stevenson, who's also the author of Treasure Island. We've talked about that book as well. So let's get started. It's kind of a cool story and involves a little bit of magic, although they like to call it science sometimes. But for me, it's kind of magic because this sort of thing doesn't really happen in real life. But it's fun to imagine what would happen if it did. And there are also some great themes we can talk about, as we always do in day 3. Today, though, we're going to focus on the plot or the story. Let's get started and read through the plot right now.
In Victorian London, England, Mr. Utterson is out strolling with his cousin, Mr. Enfield, who mentions a strange incident. The other night he saw a sinister-looking man knock down a little girl. The man, named Mr. Hyde, agreed to pay a large sum to the girl's family. He then disappeared through a door and returned with a check signed by the respected scientist Dr. Jekyll. Considering the odd circumstances, Utterson, who is Jekyll's lawyer, suspects Hyde is blackmailing the doctor, a suspicion that only grows after Jekyll names Hyde as his sole beneficiary in his new will. A year later, Hyde is seen beating a prominent politician to death. The police call Utterson, who also represented the politician, to help with the case, but Hyde has vanished. Concerned about Jekyll's safety, Utterson visits their mutual friend, Dr. Lanyon, who's recently had a falling out with Jekyll about the doctor's scientific practices. Lanyon gives Utterson a letter to be opened if Jekyll dies or disappears, but mysteriously dies himself soon after. Meanwhile, Jekyll becomes increasingly reclusive. His worried butler brings Utterson to the scientist's locked laboratory, fearing foul play. They break open the door to find Mr. Hyde, who has seemingly died from suicide. Utterson learns that Jekyll had created a potion that physically turned him into a man without morals or guilt, whom he named Hyde. He took another drug to turn back into Jekyll, and the shock of seeing this transformation was what killed Lanyon. In time, though, Jekyll started transforming into Hyde without even taking the medicine. Worse still, he had lost control of his other half's wickedness. Fearing he'd transform into Hyde permanently, Jekyll decided to end both their lives.
Okay, let's get started, guys. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. If you haven't figured out by now, let me tell you that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are the same person. But Dr. Jekyll is actually the good guy. Mr. Hyde turns into a monster. His personality changes. And it's been a really popular book and a plot story. It's been remade several times into movies, TV series. There have been a lot of movies made that had this story behind it because it's kind of fun to do. We're talking about an era in history called the Victorian era. Victorian England was when Queen Victoria was reigning as queen, and the styles back then were quite lovely. Ladies, you should go look up the fashion. It was kind of fun. But it was, this is set, I would say, the late 1800s. Turn of the century is still Queen Victoria. When she was reigning, she reigned for a long time.
She did.
But let's go ahead and get started. We've got Victoria, England, and we've got a guy named Mr. Utterson. He's out strolling with his cousin. If you stroll, you're just kind of wandering around. You're not in a hurry. You're not running to make an appointment. You're just enjoying your walk outside.
Yeah, Mr. Utterson and Mr. Enfield are out having a stroll in London, England a long time ago. And Mr. Enfield, of course, is the cousin, and he mentions to Mr. Utterson something about a strange incident.
Yeah.
An incident, of course, is something that happened, usually that attracts a lot of attention, and usually something that people aren't really sure about. We've got lots of incidents in history. I think here in Taiwan, there was something called the Meilidao incident. And of course, there was the 228 incident. It kind of depends on your political affiliation as to how you would describe those incidents. But of course, those are things that happen usually in history or among people themselves. So yes, indeed, he says something about an incident, something that happened. And here is that incident. The other night, he saw a sinister-looking man knock down a little girl. That was the incident. He just saw this. A man, he knocked down a little girl. Just kind of pushed her over, tripped her, or something like that. And this man was not a normal man. He was very sinister-looking. And sinister is an adjective here. It just means you look kind of evil. You look like a bad person.
Yeah, if you see that word, you probably should know it's kind of a bad guy or a bad girl. It's usually a guy who's described as being sinister, not good, evil. They're trying to find opportunities to hurt people. So he saw this guy knocking down a little girl. What adult man would knock down a little girl? So we don't know if he hit her with his arm or kicked her, but he knocked her down. The man, whose name was Mr. Hyde, agreed to pay a large sum to the girl's family. If you hurt people in this world, they can sue you, and then they can ask you to pay them money to kind of compensate or make up for the injury that you suffered, and that's what this money was for. She must have been hurt, and so the family said, "You need to give us money because you hurt our little girl." Sum here is a word we use to talk about an amount of money. It doesn't mean big or small. It just means some sort of amount of money. What sum did you have to pay? We don't use it so much anymore. We used this word a lot long ago. And in this story, which was written in the 1800s, they would have used it more often. Sum.
Yeah. For example, I could say, "Will you sell your house? I'm willing to pay you a large sum." Or, "I'm willing to pay you a large sum of money." But as you said, this is a word that was used more in the past than in the present, although we still know what it means. Indeed, it's still around. And so, of course, Hyde, I guess, was sorry about knocking that little girl down. So he said, "Okay, I will pay you a large sum of money to forget the whole thing or to pay for the little girl's medical treatment or whatever."
Don't tell the police. Maybe it was a bribe. We don't know.
Yes, indeed. Could have been. You'd have to read the book to see the exact details. And then this Mr. Hyde disappeared through a door and then later returned with a check signed by the respected scientist, Dr. Jekyll. So Mr. Hyde did not write the check. The check is from someone else by the name of Dr. Jekyll. And they probably know who this person is because we're describing him as being a respected scientist. A scientist, of course, is somebody who experiments in science. An astronomer, a chemist, whatever. And he's respected, which means people know about him and they respect his work. They don't think he's a mad scientist. They think he's a respected scientist. He works for a prestigious university, maybe like Oxford or Cambridge or whatever. Everybody respects him and the work he does.
Yeah, I wanted to mention you said a mad scientist. We use that word mad not to mean angry. It means crazy. If you see those two words together, if someone's a mad scientist, he's a crazy scientist. We're going to learn more about this respected scientist soon, though. He is a little crazy. So considering the odd circumstances, Utterson, who is Jekyll's lawyer, suspects Hyde is blackmailing the doctor. Aha! A suspicion that only grows after Jekyll names Hyde as his sole beneficiary in his new will. This sentence has so much information in it. Let's kind of take out one piece here at the beginning. It says, considering the odd circumstances, odd means strange. And when you talk about the circumstances of a situation, you're talking about the situation, right? You're talking about how something happened, when it happened, who was involved, what are the circumstances. And if you maybe witness a crime someday or have something happen to you, the police will ask you about the circumstances. When did the crime take place? What did you see? Were there witnesses there? What can you tell us about the circumstances? And typically that word is always in plural form when we talk about the situation.
Right, so it was strange or unusual. Why would he knock down a door? Excuse me, why would he knock down a little girl and disappear through a door and then come back with someone else's check? That's really strange. It's really odd. These are unusual circumstances. And Utterson, who is Jekyll's lawyer, suspects Hyde is blackmailing the doctor. So again, we've got Mr. Utterson here. Remember, he was the one out strolling with Mr. Enfield. Enfield told him about this incident. And Utterson suspects, he thinks, well, I think, or I suspect that Hyde, this guy who knocked down the little girl, is actually blackmailing the doctor. That's why he has this check with the money. If you blackmail somebody, you basically threaten to reveal information about them unless they pay you some money. That's usually what happens when one is blackmailed, especially if you're like running for political office or something. Someone might say, hey, I happen to have some information about you when you went to university, a certain party you went to. If you want me to keep my mouth shut, you better pay me $1 million, and then you can run for your political office or something like that. That is blackmail, or to blackmail someone. So he suspects this. He thinks this is what's going on, that this Hyde is blackmailing Dr. Jekyll.
That's right. So his suspicion, that feeling that his client's being blackmailed, that suspicion grows because Jekyll names Hyde as his sole beneficiary in his new will. Sole here means only. And when you see the word beneficiary, it's kind of a long word, beneficiary, it is indeed related to the word benefit or benefits. When you get benefits at work, it means you get some health insurance, maybe retirement funds, stuff like that. A beneficiary is someone who inherits something from someone else who passes away, especially if they've been named in the will. If you're the sole beneficiary in a will, it means whatever that person had who passed away, whatever he had is given to you only. No one else gets anything else. Oh, no. So if you're the sole beneficiary and you have some sort of relationship to that wealthy person, you're going to be in good shape after that person dies. So what makes the lawyer suspect something bad's happening is Jekyll, who's that really respected scientist, has just changed his will, and he said, I want Mr. Hyde to inherit everything from me when I die.
That does sound suspicious here. Mr. Hyde, of course, is the one who had that check. He's also the one who is going to inherit all the money from Dr. Jekyll, so that does sound very suspicious to me. And you know what? I think that brings us to the midway point of our explanation. We're going to stop right now and listen to our Chinese teacher.
Hi everyone, my name is Jenny. 今天我们要看的是第16单元。好，我们今天要欣赏的文学作品是化身博士 Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde。大家也许读过这个故事，但是呢，却不太清楚它的作者。好，对于这个故事的内容，当然也有很多值得讨论的地方。所以说，我们这个文章会分成3段，而我们要先从这个故事本身的故事内容谈起。那这个故事 当然它发生的地点是在维多利亚时代的伦敦。好，那这边开始就告诉你里面的一位角色叫 Mr. Utterson。 好，从他的内容看起来就是那一天发生了一件不寻常的事。什么事呢？因为 the other night 前几天的晚上，他看到了有一个长相邪恶的男人，然后把一个女孩子弄倒。好，我们看到 sinister looking。 sinister 这个字本来就是表示不祥的，邪恶的，所以当一个人看起来怎么样，你说他 sinister looking 就是长相邪恶，那相对的很好看 good looking。 好，我们再往下读。那之后当然这一连串的事件里面就看到了我们的主角 Hyde。 这个 Hyde 这位先生他付了一笔钱给这个家人，然后后来他就消失了，从门后消失之后出来的竟然是另外一个科学家 Jekyll 博士签名的一张支票。这非常的奇怪，所以说 Utterson 他就想会不会是 Hyde 他想要敲诈这个博士呢？好，他心里这样子的怀疑。这里有一个动词 suspect， 我们知道 suspect这样念它是一个动词，可是如果呢你把它念成 suspect 那就是名词了。注意有很多英文的动词跟名词，它们的差别不是在于拼字，而是重音的不同，这就是一个例子。那我们可以看看想想有没有别的动词或者是名词也是这样子的。一个比较常见的，比如说 conduct 跟 conduct， 比如说 conflict 跟 conflict， 比如说 increase 跟 increase， 这都是重音节的不同，造成词类的不同。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. We're talking about the story, or the plot in the novel, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So moving on, back to the plot. In the second paragraph, it says a year later, Hyde is seen beating a prominent politician to death. Uh-oh. So he goes from knocking a girl down in the street to beating someone to death. If you're prominent, you're very well known. People know who you are, probably because you've had a lot of success. A politician is very famous because he's always in the news. People have to vote for them, so they know the name. That's a pretty big deal. The police call Utterson, who also represented the politician, to help with the case. But Hyde has vanished. Remember, Utterson is the attorney also for Jekyll, Dr. Jekyll. But Hyde has disappeared. They don't know where he is. If you vanish, it means people don't know where you went and you kind of just mysteriously disappeared.
Right, so the police saw this Mr. Hyde beating a prominent politician to death, and then Mr. Hyde disappeared. So they said, gee, what are we going to do? So they called Mr. Utterson. Hey, can you help us find this guy? We saw him beating someone to death, but now he's disappeared. We need your help in finding him and maybe building a case against Mr. Hyde. Well, concerned about Jekyll's safety, Utterson visits their mutual friend, Dr. Lanyon, who's recently had a falling out with Jekyll about the doctor's scientific practices. So, okay, here we've got the lawyer here, Mr. Utterson, and he's worried about Dr. Jekyll's safety. Dr. Jekyll, of course, is a respected scientist. So he goes to talk to Dr. Lanyon, who's a mutual friend of theirs. Mutual means it's between them, which means Dr. Lanyon is Dr. Jekyll's friend, and Mr. Utterson is also Dr. Jekyll's friend.
Okay, so they go and they're together. Utterson's visiting Dr. Lanyon, who's recently had a falling out with Jekyll because he doesn't like the doctor's scientific practices. Maybe he's doing some crazy scientific experiments, which he is. If you have a falling out with a friend, guys, it means you have an argument with a friend, a fight, and you're no longer talking to each other. You could forgive each other eventually, but right now, you're not talking to each other. We all have falling out with friends every once in a while. So he doesn't like what Dr. Jekyll's doing in the laboratory. So Lanyon gives Utterson a letter to be opened if Jekyll dies or disappears, but mysteriously dies himself soon after. Ooh, a lot of people are dying. So here, Lanyon, who had had a falling out with Jekyll, gives the lawyer a letter that he should open if Jekyll dies or disappears, and then he dies himself. So meanwhile, Jekyll becomes increasingly reclusive. If you're reclusive, you keep to yourself. You don't want to be around other people. He's also got his butler very worried. So Jekyll's butler, who's worried about his boss, Dr. Jekyll, brings Utterson to the scientist's locked laboratory, fearing foul play. Well, if you have a laboratory, it's a lab. We call it lab for short. It's probably easier for you to say. Is where we do scientific experiments. When I was in school, especially junior high, high school, and I had chemistry, we would go into the lab to do experiments. That would be our homework. He's got a laboratory himself, and the butler's worried because he thinks there's been foul play. Foul play usually refers to some sort of crime that's happened, and typically if I see foul play, I think of murder. So when you hear those words, we think there's foul play, that just means someone believes something criminal has gone on.
Right, so maybe, for example, I could say the famous politician was found dead yesterday. And the police, they suspect foul play.
Yes.
They think somebody actually killed this guy, but they ran away and there's no evidence or whatever. Or maybe they don't suspect foul play. They think that it was just an accident or something like that. But here, they suspect foul play. They think something's going on here. Somebody murdered somebody. And they break open the door to find Mr. Hyde, who has seemingly died from suicide. So there you go. There's Mr. Hyde, the guy who knocked down the little girl at the beginning of the story.
Killed the prominent politician, beat him to death. That's right.
So, yeah, he's looks like he's actually committed suicide, or he's died from suicide, which means the guy basically killed himself. Okay, moving on now to the next paragraph here. Utterson learns that Jekyll had created a potion that physically turned him into a man without morals or guilt, whom he named Hyde. Okay, so that's what happens here. Utterson finds out, or he learns, that Dr. Jekyll, the respected scientist, had actually created something in the laboratory, a potion, which is a kind of medicine in liquid form, and that potion physically turned him into a man who does not have morals or guilt. Guilt means you have feelings of regret if you've done something wrong. You might feel guilty, for example, if you hurt someone, but you didn't mean to.
Right. So he took another drug to turn back into Jekyll, and the shock of seeing this transformation was what killed Lanyon. So just seeing Dr. Jekyll drink the potion, that magical liquid that we often find in magical stories. He drank the liquid, turned back into himself. Mr. Hyde's the bad guy, Dr. Jekyll's the good guy, and just watching that transformation was what probably killed Lanyon of shock. So in time, though, Jekyll started transforming into Hyde even without swallowing the potion or that medicine. So he was afraid he had no control over himself either. So worse still, he had lost control of his other half's wickedness. Mr. Hyde was truly bad. He wasn't just knocking down kids on the street. He was killing people, and fearing he'd transform into Hyde permanently, Jekyll decided to commit suicide to end both their lives.
Boy, that sounds like a really happy ending, doesn't it?
It was a self-sacrifice. He sacrificed his life to save others around him.
What a moral thing to do. Okay, that brings us to the end of our summary of our featured novel in today's program. Right now, we're going to hear from our Chinese teacher.
好，我们继续来看变身博士或是化身博士，这个翻译也可以。这一个故事的内容。好，我们提到刚刚其实最关键的人物 Hyde 跟 Jekyll， 我们已经知道这两个人这当中的关系实在非常的奇怪。不过这边就从 Hyde 他后来又发生了一件事，就是他把一个重要的政治人物给打死了。好，那我们提到呢 Utterson 他也觉得很纳闷，而且呢他其实有点担心，他担心说Dr. Jekyll 会不会呢其实已经深陷危机。好，注意到 concerned about， 这个当然 concerned 是一个过去分词的形式，那我们就要想这样的开头表示这边是一个分词结构分词构句，那原来它这边就表示一个原因，所以你可以把这个连接词 because 放回来，它其实就是要讲 because Utterson was concerned about blah blah blah。 好，当然简化之后就只剩下 concerned。 这个故事呢其实后来非常的曲折离奇，因为呢他们共同的一位朋友叫蓝洋医师也离奇的就死亡了，而 Jekyll 本身就越来越奇怪啊。那男管家后来就把 Utterson 带到 Dr. Jekyll 他这个上所的实验室里面，因为他怕搞不好会有谋杀案发生。接下来什么事情发生了呢？果然的，当他们把那个门踹开之后，发现 Hyde 好像已经死于自杀。好，再来，最后呢 Utterson 他知道了原来事情是跟 Jekyll 他发明创造了一种药水，然后吞下这个药水之后，他竟然就可以变成好像另外一个人，而这个另外一个人就是 Hyde。 这个 Hyde 是一个怎么样的人呢？ A man without morals or guilt， 也就是说没有道德感也不会自责。好，最后我们知道其实这是一个很大的悲剧。那当然知道 Hyde 跟 Jekyll 本来就是同一个人，而最糟糕的就是他其实是不能控制另外一个邪恶的自己。谈到更糟糕的是 worse still， 这个片语我们常用，另外常用的跟它同样的意思的就是像 what's worse 或是 worse yet。 OK， 我们今天的讲解就到这边结束，我们下次见。
Well, that's just our plot, guys. We've got 2 more lessons to talk about the themes in the book and also the backstory of Robert Louis Stevenson, how he grew up, his background. I love to learn about that. So that's all the time we have for now. Join us for our next program. For English Digest, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Tom. Goodbye.
See ya.